Hello, friends. So, Bible study. We're in the NIV, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We're going to do verses 1 through 24. We're on, again, a little bit of a sensitive subject matter because we are going to be talking about things actually I don't prefer to talk about, which is getting into the private business of individuals. Like, mostly my policy would be like, if we don't need the authorities involved because it's not like consensual, which would include, the being has to be capable of consent. Like, if we don't need the cops because it's not some form of sexual assault or rape, then I don't need to know, because I'm not involved in that situation, so I don't need to be there with them. Like, it's none of my business. So this thing is on the subject of marriage, but of course, if we're talking about marriage, we're also going to be talking about sex, because that's how that goes, right? That's what married people do. So, and it's not that I have a problem with that subject matter, just I don't like to be in the business of other people. This parable is called marriage. Chapter 7, verse 1. Now for the matters you wrote about. It is good for a man not to marry. But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. So I need to make this clear. This is not a free pass for husbands to rape their wives. There is no love in rape at all. It's not about love and it's not about sex. It's about power and control and force, because a rapist does not get aroused like a regular guy. It's not the woman's, oh my God, I want you so bad, that gets him aroused. It's the force that gets him aroused. If she was compliant, he likely would not even get an erection. It's a problem that I've encountered when having conversations with guys, where they think like, oh, rape accusations are everywhere because she just changes her mind the next morning. And that's a fallacy. That's a giant fallacy. In fact, we have the other problem where it is underreported, not overreported. Now, it should never be used, rape accusations should never be used as an attack in some fashion. That's just unacceptable. Of course, you're lying. There's nothing about lying that's acceptable. So either side of that equation, it's not okay. But this also says that the husband is not free to give his body to whoever he wants. It belongs to his wife. That possession is supposed to be a two-way street. So yes, even if in your heart you're fantasizing about some other person, regardless of what gender you're at, in this equation of this marriage, you are cheating. Any thoughts of anyone else is cheating. And according to Paul, the only reason you get married is because you're weak. Because you can't deprive your sexual urges. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not a command. I wish that all men were as I am, which is single, unmarried kind of thing, celibate for life. That's, to Paul, that's how you're showing your ultimate amount of faith. Any desire for any sex at all, and you are less faithful than him or anybody who's living the life he's living. I'm not saying I espouse these beliefs. I'm explaining it. Okay. I wish that all men were as I am, but each man has his own gift from God. No one has this gift. Another has that. One has this gift, another has that. So not everybody's going to be capable of no sex. So those people should get married. This is all part of his opinion. Now to the unmarried and the widows, I say it is good for them to stay unmarried as I am. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. For it is better to marry.
I don't know, but I found these results on search.
I have no idea why Google decided to spew that, but that was Google. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. I have no idea what's... part of me is very curious about what the search thing is. Hold on. Okay, so what I found on search was what I'm reading right now. That's what I pulled up. So that's kind of funny. Okay. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband. And if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband must not divorce his wife. Now I want to make this, in the Jewish faith, divorce is allowed. Okay? Has been from the beginning. Always been allowed up to this point in history. And this is the first time anyone is uttering, to my knowledge, if you're a biblical scholar out there and you've got something else, feel free to put it in the comments. I will be happy to read it. I love to learn, so there's, the more valid information, the better. I don't mind being politely corrected. Politely. Because I'm not rude to you, so don't be rude to me. This is the first time anybody is saying that there should be no permissible reasons for divorce. Right? Although that's not true. In this passage, he does give permissible things for divorce. We have to finish it. But it should not be the first action. It should be the last resort. When a husband and wife, in my particular opinion, are no longer treating each other with love, and they can't treat each other with love, like whatever it was, the offense is so, like physical violence has occurred, and you can't come, there's no way to heal that. Like there can be no trust rebuilt, because sometimes once a trust is broken, you can never truly rebuild it, and the relationship is broken forever. And when you're in that place, staying away from each other is the appropriate thing. Okay? He's saying stay away from each other, but don't divorce. To the rest I say this, I, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer, and she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is a not believer, and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean. But as it is, they are holy. So the idea being that one person filled with God energy, because remember, he's a Pharisee, he's a Levite then, and they have very particular belief system about the energy soul contract that happens within intimacy. They don't even marry outside of their tribe for fear of marrying an unclean woman. Just make that abundantly clear, at least not during that time frame in history. So they believe soul-to-soul contract. So if this one's full of God and this one has no God, when they mate, this one is injecting God energy into that one. Think of it as in, I've heard it joking from people before, when it's like, are you, we'll use Jewish in this thing. Are you Jewish? No. Do you want to be Jewish by injection? That's the joke. That's what they're talking about. Okay? That's why not being able to come apart if the person wants to stay, if they want to continue to live with them. But if verse 15, but if the unbeliever leaves, let him do so. And believing man or woman is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? How do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So if they want to leave, you can be divorced. And you're not bound. Not bound means you're free to remarry. It means your soul is untethered and you are free to make a new soul contract. That's what not bound means. I know there's going to be people who don't agree with that. You can save it. I myself have pondered on this a lot, because it's come into my personal life and I had to very much so ponder it when making my own decisions. So I'm pretty set on this one. Verse 17, nevertheless, each one should retain the place in life that the Lord assigned him and to which God has called him. This is the rule I laid down to all churches. Now, Paul lays it down to all churches. Paul does. Now, whether or not you feel that's the Lord through Paul or not, it's going to have to depend on whether or not you feel any of this is staying in the love vibration that is heaven. And then if you disagree, that's a very healthy debate you can have with somebody who's also educated, and you should. Because any debate of this nature only gives God an opportunity to talk to you. So there's nothing wrong with it. Verse 18. Was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. I don't know how you would even do that. I don't think that's not possible. I don't know of any foreskin transfer that can be done medically, because that's what that would take. Was the man uncircumcised when he was called? He should remain. He should not be circumcised. He should remain uncircumcised. He should not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's command is what counts. Now, this is a very big thing for that time, because there is the Jewish people who are still, some of them, who are considering Christianity a sect of Judaism and think every Gentile should have to live life as a Jew would, which means getting circumcised in order to get to heaven. Keeping God's commands is what counts. Each one should retain in the situation which he was in when God called him. So we'll reread that again. Verse 19. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's commands is what counts. Each should remain in the situation which he was in when God called him. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you. Although if you can gain your freedom, do so. For he who was a slave when he was called by the Lord is the Lord's freedman. Similarly, he who was a free man when he was called is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price, the blood of Jesus being the price. But do not become slaves of men. Brothers, each man as responsible to God should remain in the situation God called him to. Now, for me on this, again, I told you there are places that me and the Apostle Paul, we don't necessarily align. right? If you're in a situation where you are being hurt or abused, slavery is not allowed, at least in my country, here. It's not allowed. In most of the free world at this point, it's not allowed. Do not stay in abusive situations because some words in the Bible from some guy 2,000 years ago. Now, I know there's a lot of people that are like, but he's the Apostle Paul. He still was a human being. Every human being has the potential for flaws. Everybody. Even the Pope. Even the most holy of holies of all things. Like even Moses thought it was okay for first cousins to be humping on each other. And he was Moses. We know these days that is illegal and it's a terrible idea and that is a form of abuse. They would be considering whoever is the elders of that were involved in that, they would consider that abuse. The government would be coming and would be taking children away and doing all kinds of things like that if it were occurring. They didn't know the dangers it made back then. It's not that protections were in place for any of this. This is part of why the Jewish culture allowed for divorce. It's because if she was being abused, she could get divorced and go live back with her father and wait until they can find another marriage match. But they have to let her wounds heal first. Nobody is supposed to be staying in situations where they are physically, emotionally, or mentally abused. God is not telling you that you have to endure that and you get a badge for the most trauma you can absorb. It doesn't actually make you stronger. Anything that puts a wedge between you and God and drives you away from God does not make you stronger. And if you tell someone they must endure abuse for God, then what you're telling them is that they're not really loved by God. Right? Because they're just going to get resentful. No one is going to endure trauma forever. And God doesn't want you to. If there is no more love in the situation and you can't bring love back into the situation, like you're too wounded, then you have full permission from the Lord to go heal and become the best version of you and do what you need to do to be there. Because you can't stay in the wrong room and stay in the alignment of God. And if there's no more love in that room, then you can't stay there. And if they're hurting you intentionally and with no remorse, they don't want to change, there is nothing else, then don't stay. No matter what words were ever written by anybody, anywhere. Because anyone telling you that you have to stay is no longer in the love vibration. How are they showing you love? By telling you to stand there until this person beats you to death or something. How could that possibly be love? And why would any being, like the unconditional love of God, want you to endure that? Why? How does that show love for God? How is that bringing more light into the world? How is it anchoring light into the world? And if you can't find an answer about how it's anchoring light into the world, then it's not from God. And don't stand there and endure it because you think it gets you some badge of honor. There are no actions you can take that get you into heaven that involve things outside of the love vibration. In fact, there's not. He loves you unconditionally. And he wants you to love you the way he loves you. And unconditional love, it doesn't stand there and just keep getting hit for the sake of someone else's ego. If they love you, they won't intentionally be trying to hurt you in the first place. Go put yourself in situations where you don't have to worry about, where the next blow is coming from. Because life's too short to not have joy. And you can't have joy if you're always terrified about what's coming next. Human beings, as mammals, like any other mammal on Earth, safety is what we focus on first. After you feel safe, then you start thinking about the rest of your biological needs. It's how we're wired in our brain. God wired us that way on purpose as a survival tactic. You should honor that.